about police reform that we saw yet another heartless, callous attack on immigrant and refugees by the Trump administration. There was an ICE sweep of many 7-Elevens across the country. I just came from meeting with immigrant and refugee communities before coming here right now, and this type of activity has instilled fear, displacement, and we want them to know that as a city, the council, the mayor, the police department stand firmly behind our immigrant and refugee communities, and we will do all we can to protect them. And once again, call on the Trump administration to please cease this behavior and focus your efforts on those things that will really contribute to public safety. Now I want to speak for the reason that most of you came here. This is a very significant and good day for the city of Seattle, for the police department, and for the community. Today, federal Judge Robart has found the city of Seattle and its police department in full and effective compliance of the consent decree entered in 2012. It has been a long process. I will make longer remarks, but I want to make very clear that we know that work needs to continue. And the judge made that clear as well, that we have now reached the point where we're in full and effective compliance, but the next 2 years are going to be critical so that we can show that the Seattle Police Department can continue to stay in compliance with the consent decree, will continue to improve itself and reform itself, and address those issues that the monitor and the court have called out for the Seattle Police Department. But I want to go back a little bit in time so people understand exactly how significant this is and how we got here. I will then be turning over the podium to those who have been so critical in reaching this juncture. It was, when I was United States Attorney, a number of community organizations came to the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney's Office asking us to look at the Seattle Police Department and whether there was a pattern in practice of improper use of force. This was after there had been a series of events, almost all of them captured on video, that showed that usually young men of color were being disproportionately treated by the police department, and that force was being used in ways that simply was not appropriate. We then had the tragic slaying of John T. Williams, and we acted as a department. We did a year-long investigation working with community, working with the police department, with Police Officers Guild and police management to investigate what the facts were. And what we actually found was, indeed, there was a pattern and practice of the unconstitutional use of force. And the U.S. Attorney's Office moved forward on that and negotiated with the city for a number of months. We worked closely with the city council at that time and community groups, trying to get an agreement in place. It took a significant period of time, and we had to threaten to go to court before we finally reached agreement with the city of Seattle. And it's ironic that it was in summer of 2012 that I stood at this exact podium in this room as then United States Attorney to announce the consent decree agreement. And today I'm able to stand here as your mayor to say that we have reached full and effective compliance. And I think the results that the court has pointed out speak for themselves on how important this was. There was a 2-year trial period where the monitor was looking at the new policies and procedures. And again, I think it's important for everyone in Seattle to understand that Seattle now stands as a model because we have moved from a force that was command and control to one where de-escalation and minimization of force was the policy, the training, and now we know was actually what's happening in practice. The monitor took 2 years and studied all of the uses of force in the Seattle Police Department to determine whether there was full and effective compliance. In that 2-year period, as the court indicated, there were 760,000 incidents to which Seattle police officers were dispatched. 760,000 incidents in a 2-year period. Really importantly, less than 1% of those incidents ended up in any force at all being used, 0.5%. And of those, only 80% of them were the lowest level of force, what's called type 1, which means there may be transient pain but no serious injury. Importantly, we did not even keep track of when that type of force was used before there was a consent decree. That was one of the requirements of the consent decree. Only 39 incidences were using the more serious levels of force. I want to make very clear that any incident that uses serious of force is by its nature serious. And we know that particularly in some of the tragic incidences we have had in the city show that we can do better, particularly the shooting death recently of Charlena Lyles. We know that we want to improve ourselves as a police department. Before coming out here today, I reached out to a member of the community so they would know personally from me, their mayor, that just because we're in full and effective compliance does not mean we are going to quit doing what we do, which is to improve, to make sure that every police officer knows their job and their role. But we have seen, much to what people said was the contrary, there was a lot of talk at the beginning that you could not have a constitutional policing. You could not have a police force that used de-escalation as its model without having crime rates go up and cops quit doing their jobs. That's simply not true. Every police officer in Seattle who puts on their uniform goes to work every day to do their job and is committed to the public safety. And our crime rates have not raised. So Seattle will stand as the model and the proof that you can have good policing, you can keep your crime rates low, and you can still have very strong policing. So I want to make a couple other points. This was not just a change in the policing model itself and the de-escalation training and the use of force policies and procedures. There was a holistic approach to this. And you'll be hearing from Councilmember Gonzalez, who has been leading the charge at the council, and Pete Holmes, the city attorney. You know, this has been a holistic effort over a period of years, and each of those people, I'm sure, will echo what I'm saying is, we're not done, and we know we're not done. The court has issued some very important things that it wants us to address in particular, but the court's language itself is really important. It said that we made remarkable progress and acknowledged that this is because of the hard work of the police officers of the Seattle Police Department and their command staff. And so I want to thank Chief Best, who is here, who was with us at the beginning. She was on the police force and worked with her closely when I was U.S. Attorney during the investigation stage. And Chief O'Toole, who is no longer chief. A lot of our work, as the court noted today, our progress is because of her hard work as well. In closing, there's a lot of people who I think have to be thanked here. I've mentioned some of them, but one of them is City Attorney Pete Holmes. He and I were on opposing sides, you could call it, but actually we worked very collaboratively together during the investigation of the consent decree process in really forming that consent decree. I think there's probably no other city in the country where the U.S. Attorney has been the person signing the consent decree and then will be the mayor to make sure that it gets removed. It shows you I finish a job. And our former mayor and former council member, Tim Burgess, Tim, where are you? He was an unbelievable critical ally when he was on the city council. We would not have gotten a consent decree but for the work of city council members and particularly Tim Burgess and his leadership. And then as on the council overseeing that process, and then as mayor continuing to work through it and being part of the people moving to show that we're in full and effective compliance, it was Tim's leadership that helped get us to this place. The city council as a whole has been instrumental both in getting the consent decree and in all the reforms that have been made since then. Again, I really especially want to thank Councilmember Lorena Gonzalez. We first worked together on a police oversight panel, and then she went on to be counsel to the mayor to ensure that as the prior administration stood up its programs, they were done right, and then as moving to the council has been an unflagging person to make sure that not only is the police reforms come in place, but they also serve the needs of the community. Faye Lopez, who I think is here behind me, she has been on the CPC and all the CPC community members who are here. I want to thank them as well. It has been such a critical function and something that has set our police reform efforts apart from anyone else in the country. So thank you for your work and for all of the CPC, Reverend Walden, who's here, Colleen Echohawk. I see other people in the audience. I also want to take a personal point of privilege. I would not have been able to do the work that I did as U.S. Attorney without the work of a very talented Assistant United States Attorney by the name of Mike Diaz, who happens to be in the back of the room. I want to thank him for that. We're losing him. He's soon to become a judge, Diaz, in the state court. But I promise in closing that the next police chief of the city of Seattle will be someone who will make sure that we continue in this very important process of police reforms. We now have the ability to sit down with the Department of Justice, with the police department, with the council and others to have the roadmap for the next 2 years. We will have that roadmap for the candidates who will be chief of police, and it will be critical that we hire someone who can be the leader that we need in this community, both internally to make sure that rank and file know what is expected of them, but are supported in the very hard job that they have, and that the community knows that there will continue to be a champion for the community in the police department itself. So with that, I want to now give the microphone to Pete Holmes, who will make some remarks, and then Councilman Gonzalez, and then I think we'll take some questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. Today is the day we have all long awaited. Our work on police reform and accountability has reached a significant milestone in the federal court's order today, finding that the city's police department is in full and effective compliance. The court probably described it best when it itself said this is an enormous milestone, but, quote, this does not mean that the city and SPD's work is done. I look forward to continuing my office's work with SPD and the Department of Justice and the Monitor and his team to continue our progress through the sustainment period to the end of the consent decree. From the beginning, as your city attorney, I have advocated for police reform and accountability. I've taken the approach that we should work with DOJ, with our U.S. attorney at the time, to bring lasting reform and systemic change to SPD. And Mayor Durkan, in your new role, I confess that I still at times have some PSD, PSD. I get it in a minute. See, it hit really bad. Those were really hard times, as I think we all know.
Being my lawyer.
Yeah. And you know, you no longer have the world's largest public law firm behind you. So, but you have a very good one. You know, I also have to thank all the men and women of the police department. You deserve credit for making these changes and accepting the culture of policing that serves the public effectively and builds community. So thank you. And it's impossible, as Mayor Durkan pointed out, to thank everyone. I do want to call out at the very end here one of the assistant city attorneys, Josh Johnson, and our former assistant city attorney, Andrew Meyerberg, who's now the OPA director, and then Ian Warner over here, an assistant city attorney. These guys have all rolled up their sleeves and gone to work to make sure that this job is done. I echo Mayor Durkan's comments. I would like to also echo the thanks to Kathy O'Toole. It has been a wonderful relationship with her. I've been in touch with her today, as well as our monitor, Merrick Bob. I think that in both instances, the city has been incredibly lucky to have two consummate professionals that help to guide the city through this reform process. I am grateful to them personally for their work, and I think that the city as a whole should be. Where's Lisa Dugard standing? There she is. And Lisa Dugard, an ever-present expert on these matters, who has, thank you, Lisa. Okay, enough of the thanks. Now that we have closed out this phase one, this legal chapter, as Judge Robart called it, we will continue to work closely with our police unions. And I want to acknowledge that President Stuckey from SPOG is here, and look forward to working with you. We need to achieve labor peace with our unions, and the judge has made it clear that that's a condition of terminating eventually this consent decree. So the labor negotiations are critical to the sustainable change and to build upon the reforms that we have achieved in this consent decree. And again, I look forward to working with you and your team to make sure that we fully embed these reforms into binding contracts between our unions and the city of Seattle. Lastly, I'm going to just close on that note to say that I am hopeful and optimistic that we will achieve labor peace. Change has come to Seattle, and we embrace that change. We won't look back, and I reach out to my fellow electeds, community leaders, and most importantly to our men and women of SPD to instill and embody what we've accomplished via the consent decree with lasting reform as supported in the labor contracts. Thank you all.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Councilmember Lorena Gonzalez, and I am just really pleased to be here on such a momentous occasion. You know, as a civil rights lawyer, I've read some orders that I like, and I've read some orders that I don't like from judges. I really like this order. Today we learned that the City of Seattle reached a milestone in our efforts to seriously reform the Seattle Police Department. This day has been long in the making, and to be honest, there were probably moments on the journey for all of us where we thought we'd never hear those beautiful words, full and effective compliance. But today, Judge Robart has given the city its greatest achievement and its greatest challenge. Will we be able to drive through long-term, sustainable police reforms without the training wheels? We are up to the challenge because the ultimate price of not doing so will be paid by the next Charlena Lyles and by the officers who are in those unfortunate situations. So I want to be clear, just like you heard my fellow electeds be clear earlier, which is that we are not done. This is not mission accomplished. This is when the work, frankly, really begins. The City Council continues to search for the right candidate to be our inaugural Inspector General of Public Safety. That person will effectively be the permanent police monitor once he or she is hired. We are taking the judge's word seriously that the IG position is key to ensuring that the city stays in full and effective compliance. And we won't back down from this historic opportunity to implement and stand up that office of Inspector General. It is an office that is a critical component of my own vision to leave a legacy of an independent and community-driven police reform system. And we hope to be able to march forward with its implementation very soon. I also want to do some thank yous since we're on the thank you train here. I want to thank the almost 30 community organizations that demanded these reforms in the first place, including the ACLU of Washington. And I want to thank Mayor Durkan, who, while she was the U.S. Attorney General of Western Washington, she listened and she acted. And I also want to thank the Community Police Commission for their steady partnership and consistent advocacy to ensure that we remain focused on what matters. And that's the people that our officers sign up to serve and protect every day in our city. I think the Community Police Commission has done an amazing job of keeping us centered on that people focus, and I appreciate all of your guidance and counsel as we continue to struggle with how we are going to best implement all of these reforms. And I was joking with them before I came out that I should tell the story about how we locked ourselves in a room for 16 hours over a couple of weekends, really grappling with some of the policy issues that we tried to resolve through our police accountability ordinance. And I know that we still have a lot of work to cross that finish line, including making sure that we find that labor piece with our unions. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue to work together collaboratively to accomplish that in good faith. And I believe that it is possible. And you know, yesterday, I want to just mention that yesterday was National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. The day's news today, I think, merits a particular Seattle Police Department Appreciation Day. And I really want to thank the command staff, especially Kathleen O'Toole, who's no longer with us, but really to the rank and file officers for earnestly complying with what sometimes felt like shifting policies, practices, and a lot of additional training. And I recognize that put a lot of pressure on our rank and file officers. And the reality is that we wouldn't be able to be here standing before all of you cheering this achievement if it wasn't for the true commitment of our rank and file officers and our command staff to implement all of the reforms that were being asked of us. And I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we can stand here now and say that. And my sincere thanks goes out to them for being our partners in this effort. I also want to thank my former colleague, Councilmember Mayor Tim Burgess. He was my vice chair on the Gender Equity, Safe Communities, and New Americans Committee, and was really such a solid counselor for me and friend as we struggled with a lot of these issues, including some of the more controversial shootings that occurred in the last 2 years. And I just appreciate his sage wisdom and his counsel in all of those areas. And I hope that I can continue on in your legacy to make sure that we are respectful of the hard work that we know our officers do, while also centering the reforms that we do on the real needs of our community. And that's a lesson that I certainly learned from you, and I appreciate that and hope to be able to continue to do that work. So, again, the work is not done. We have a lot more work to do. I know that we have the right team here to do the work, and we will continue to do it, and hope to bring that community center focus along in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, our fellow elected officials. My name is Enrique Gonzalez, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Seattle Community Police Commission. And I want to start a few short remarks by, first of all, acknowledging that we are on Duwamish land and the original people of this land. And I really appreciate, we as a commission really appreciate our elected officials saying that the work is not done. And I think it's time that we really talk about what the definition of full and effective compliance really means. Full and effective compliance in no way indicates the work of reforming the police accountability system in Seattle is done. Full and effective compliance does not mean we have fixed policing in Seattle. Full and effective compliance does not mean that communities across Seattle feel safer or trust the system. It does not mean that we can pat ourselves on the back and say, job well done. What full and effective compliance does mean is that this phase of the consent decree is done. The city now enters a 2-year monitoring period. The work that the community has done has brought us to this point, and now the real work begins. The community started this work, the community held us, and will hold us accountable, and the community must remain centered as we move forward. It is incumbent upon the mayor, the council, the city attorney, the Seattle Police Department, and the Community Police Commission, and all of us in the city of Seattle to make sure that we continue with this work. We want to thank all the city officials, including the Seattle Police Department, for their continued hard work on police reform, and we look forward to the work ahead. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, I mean, I can't. No, you got a paper. I just didn't.
No.
All right.
Good.
All right. Thank you very much. And again, just want to acknowledge the hard work that everyone has done. But also, Enrique reminds us yet again how much hard work there is ahead of us. But I do think every police officer in Seattle should feel proud. We would not have made it to this milestone without the commitment of every one of them to serve their community and do it in a way that was best serving that community. So I want to thank them. And with that, we can take a few questions. No questions?
So, as you mentioned earlier, Robart noted that there's some things backed up on the labor agreement with SPOG. Do you have a plan for getting that done, and have you gone back to the table with them?
We will continue to work with SPOG. I'm glad to see President Stuckey here. We have meetings scheduled to see if we can move things off the dime. There's a lot of legal various things have been challenged in an arbitration that perhaps Pete Holmes will announce, but I will make this commitment. We want to get a contract. We want there to be labor peace. The judge has made it very clear that that's a requirement for moving forward. And so we will work very hard to get that done. And at the same time, and it's not going to come as a surprise to anyone at SPOG because we worked on this before, is reform will not be compromised. And so the only question is, how do we build that into a contract, looking backwards, but most importantly, moving forward?
What did you hear from family members today of people who have experienced excessive use of force from Seattle Police Department?
I heard from all the family members I talked to that they will continue to push the city to make sure that reforms are real. And they will look for transparency at each phase. As we know, one of the key factors now that people move into is the inquest proceeding. I was very heartened to see that the county is going to be reforming that process, that it's halted the inquests that are pending. I've participated in an inquest before, and I believe that they need to be reformed. So I know that for every one of those family members, you know, we use statistics, but statistics don't tell the story of what happens in a family when one of these tragedies occur. And one tragedy is too many tragedies. And while you can't have a tragedy-free police department, it has got to be our goal. So every improvement we make, and as we continue to make improvements, we want to increase not just how we police, but to give the community that confidence by having enough transparency in the review process, and that's transparency in the discipline process, and a very strong IG and OPA that will have that, and of course the CPC to be there to make sure that we're held accountable in a different way than probably any other police department in the country.
Does the ruling today change your calculation as far as the police chief search goes?
No, it does not change my calculations on the police chief. It just makes it more firm in my mind that the police chief that will continue for the city of Seattle has to be committed to this process. And one of the factors we're going to be looking at is that a person over the next 2 years that can not just keep us in compliance, because that's just holding steady. Are they a person who can see, this is how you stay in compliance, but here's how we have to improve. Here's what we have to do better. One of the things that the judge noted in a footnote that is really important to me, and I know really important to community, is we have an issue related to bias policing that has to be more fully developed. The city did not keep those data when we did the investigation, so we were not able to make a finding on bias policing, but we included in the consent decree because I was very concerned, the community were very concerned. We now have data in the study showing that we need to do more work there. So we need to dive down in that and understand what it is to make sure. So the next police chief has got to be someone who can work internally to support police officers. You know, we were reminded this week what a dangerous job it is to be a police officer. And all of us have to think about that every day that a police officer puts themselves in harm's way for us. So we have to have a chief who's committed to keeping officers safe, but also committed to keeping them accountable and having a police department that was reinvented every day to adjust to the realities of the street.
One more question?
Can you talk about the latest on body cameras and how the 2-year probation period is going to work as well?
The 2-year period where we have to stay in compliance, we'll have to look at all the assessments. The monitor made a series of assessments to make sure that we are in compliance on all of the things under the consent decree. So there will be a regular look, spot check, if you will, to make sure how are we doing. We have yet to sit down with the chief and the city attorney for the city to come up with one, and the council. It's for the city to come up with what its plan is. Then we have to meet with the Department of Justice and monitor to come with an agreed plan. And once we have that agreed plan, we need to execute. But as we execute, you know, policing is not a static thing. It happens every day on streets that change by every minute. And so as events happen, we have to have the ability to have the feedback to say, how could we have done it better? How could we have served the police officer better? How could we serve the community better? So there'll still be a very robust process in place over the next 2 years to make sure that we're not slipping in any way, but we continue to improve.
And more body cameras?
Body cameras will be fully implemented. It's one of the things, obviously, that we have to negotiate with SPOG on, you know, that they've briefed us on. So we'll see that, but I want to be clear that, you know, my predecessor signed an executive order. Body cameras have been implemented. And I think the ironic thing is police officers are now finding that body cameras are helping them, because in many cases they help show that a complaint did not occur. I think there's a question in working with the ACLU. We have to make sure that the privacy of people that go to the police are protected, and that our body cam footage doesn't become shock video on, you know, late night cable. But I think those privacy issues can be worked out, and we can have the accountability that we need. Thank you very much. It's a really great day for the Seattle Police Department, the City of Seattle, but the work is not done. Good work.
I know.
All right, take care.
Hi. Feeling good about this?
Hey.
Nice talking to you.
Congratulations. Yeah. I can see I was always behind.
Especially the tenor. Heidi really like that.
I do Heidi.
Hey,
So how's phase 2? Is there a quick overview? How's phase 2 going to look different than phase 1?
Well, the judge said it's cool.
I'm grateful for you guys.
Could be seen there, yeah. Come on.